Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Julio Godinez, and welcome to today's DevOps webinar, How Practical Resiliency Experiments Can Help Ensure Business Continuity, brought to you by Gremlin. We have a great webinar for you today, but before we get started, I need to go through some housekeeping announcements. Today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any part of the webinar, you will be able to watch it again. We will be sending out a link to access the webinar on demand, or you can visit devops.com/webinars, and it will be available there for you as well. We want to hear from you, so please feel free to send in your questions at any time throughout the program by using the Q&A tab. We also encourage discussion by using the chat tab, so let us know your thoughts or just say a quick hello. Finally, stick around until the end because we are doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so stay tuned to see if you're a winner. Joining me today is Alex Drag, Senior Product Manager at Gremlin. And with that, I'm now going to put myself on mute, turn off my camera, and let you begin.
Awesome. Thank you, Julio. And I'd like to echo Julio said, thank you all for joining today. I know that everyone's time is precious. It really does mean a lot to me and to us at Gremlin that you all decided to spend some time with us today. I'm really excited to talk about, I want to talk through today's presentation because we're talking about three separate topics that I find that aren't typically talked about in the same meeting room, right? So I'm really excited to give this talk a go. And as Leo says, please do leave feedback in the chat, ask questions throughout the presentation. I'm hoping to have as much engagement as possible. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. And before I jump in, I do want to talk about a little bit, who am I, right? So who is this person speaking to you all today? So my name is Alex Drag, product marketer, product specialist at Gremlin, and a reliability enthusiast. But outside of work stuff, I live in Fort Collins, Colorado with my girlfriend and my dog, a little slice of heaven. If you have not visited, I highly recommend it. I really love anything outdoors and craft beer related, hence the move to Colorado. I also recently acquired a Traeger. My life has not been the same since. I've been smoking meats left and right. It is incredible. It is becoming a cornerstone, I think, of my identity. And then a little bit about some of my background professionally. So I started in the QA world. Worked for a few testing companies. And this is where I first really began to sort of understand the importance of quality, right? And this quality is, I think it's an overarching term. We'll talk about resiliency and reliability. And I think that they intermingle, right? And I think that there's been this conversation for a long time, right? That the main competitive differentiator and advantage is speed to market. And no doubt, in an agile and DevOps or whatever other buzzword world we live in, speed is crucial, right? But quality also is incredibly important. And I believe is going to be one of the major differentiators going forward, right? No longer just first to market, but I like to talk about being first and best to market. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today and what exactly that means. And instead of an agenda slide, I like to sort of cut to the chase, right? And the reason that I'm here, beyond having a cool and engaging conversation with you all, is to essentially make three arguments, right? So I'm going to make these three arguments. I'm going to hopefully present some convincing evidence. If not, let me know so we can make this conversation better. Those three arguments being that what we call the business, right, should care about IT resilience. The second sort of following argument is that IT resilience should be seen as a core component of any business continuity in any digital environment, right? So this digital business environment that we all exist in. And then the third argument is that chaos engineering must be a core component of a modern resilience initiative and therefore a part of a business continuity strategy. So let's dive into these three. First, the business should care about resilience. And I like to talk about this sort of as what I call a two-part story, right? And to begin with, we start with the part one, the opportunities, right? I think that we talk about things like resilience and we talk about reliability, but we don't connect it to business value, right? All that often. And that's what I'm here to do in this first part. And the first bucket of value that I like to talk about is revenue generation, right? Who here doesn't want to help generate more revenue for the business, right? It's a huge deal. And the reality is resilience, reliability, all of these words sometimes used interchangeably, have a huge impact on your ability to generate revenue, right? And the way that I look at this is essentially, if you're more resilient, you're going to be up more, down less, right? And this means more time to generate revenue. I mean, you think about something like a Black Friday, right? And we hear about this all the time from our customers and from the market, that if they aren't up for some of our bigger customers and people that we talk to with larger businesses and larger revenue generation, typically, if they're not up for an hour, I mean, millions of dollars might be lost, right? It's a huge deal. So the longer you're up, the more time that your service, your product, or whatever it is that you're putting out into the world has to generate revenue. The second is saving time, right? So I also like to talk about working less, right? And for the business, this looks like happy employees and less overhead spent, right? So you can reduce time and money spent detecting reliability and resilience issues, right? So that MTTD, and then also resolving these issues, MTTR, mean time to detection, mean time to resolution, right? So you can save time by prioritizing resilience and cutting this MTTD and MTTR. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that actually looks like in practice a little bit later. The third is reducing risk, right? So you reduce the risk of one, downtime, which is a big deal. Two, time-intensive resolution processes that we just sort of mentioned. And three, impacts to customer experience, right? And this sort of rolls perfectly into the fourth bucket, is bolstering your brand, right? The reality is that reliable, resilient, high-quality customer experiences build an audience of loyal customers, right? And this is really, really important, right? I had some animation here that didn't pop up, but it was supposed to. It basically talks about the stat that I show, is that 37% of customer churn or lost revenue due to downtime is because the customers they report, there's a horrible customer experience that they then share with others. You sort of decimate this loyal audience of brand enthusiasts, lose their business, but also lose the business of potential customers right through what we could call a negative referral. So part two, why the business should care about resilience. Reality is we've all heard the horror stories. I'm sure that over the last week, you've heard about the most recent downtime and uptime related and resilience related horror story, right? But the reality is this happens all the time. It happens across industry verticals. I'm not here to say it'll completely stop, but it is something that we need to be concerned with, right? It's something we should do our best to prevent as much as possible. Just for example, I mentioned earlier, Black Friday failures. See the Forbes article from 2016, 2019, a huge bank outage, right? The banking website was down, wasn't working. This year in May, huge airline incident with American. And then in June of this year, we had a giant widespread outages where you had airlines, banks, stock exchanges, other trading platforms all suffered outages after some key internet infrastructure failed, right? And this is something that everyone here probably wants to avoid, right? So there's a huge emphasis on resilience behind making sure that these kinds of things do not occur. Here's the animation on the wrong side, right? And this matters a lot. This is what I was mentioning earlier, that 37% of downtime related lost revenue is driven by reputation damage and customer churn as a result of poor customer experience. And this is where I like to lay it out this way, right? In sort of this two-part story. So I could, I guess, just point to the horror stories, or could just point to the positive opportunities. But I think it's something that we like to talk about a lot internally at Gremlin, and something that I hear a bunch when we're speaking with people in the market, right? There's this difficulty in answering the question, how can I measure the risk and value of that outage that never happened, right? Because the reality is, while we don't promise by any means that issues won't occur, but prioritizing resilience and reliability can definitely prevent a decent amount of them, right? And can make them much easier to recover from. So how do you sort of quantify that value of that outage that never actually occurred, right? And the way that I like to look at it, right? We talked about the outages, these happen, and these things equal those positive opportunities, right? That revenue generation, the reduction of risk, the bolstering of your brand, and ultimately the saving of your time of your teammates, right? Your employees. So we've made this argument that it's important, right? If you don't prioritize things like reliability, like resiliency, you're missing out on the generated revenue. You're not reducing risk. You're not saving time, and you're potentially harming your brand, right? So now I move into the second argument, is that resilience should be seen as a core component of business continuity. And why is that? Well, the reality is the expectations are high, right? In this sort of digital environment that we operate in these days, our customers expect a 24/7 from anywhere level of availability. And there might be some head scratching here, around the term of business continuity, because so much of this has been focused much more around sort of the people process stuff, right? Like what happens when some crazy natural disaster happens, or like, what do we do to keep business continuous from a business process perspective? But the reality is, because business is digital, right? Business continuity management must incorporate things like IT resilience and reliability, right? These digital systems have to be able to be kept continuous when technical disruptions occur as well. And the reality is, it's not just me making this argument, right? The analysts would back me up. Here are two quotes from Gartner, actually from their recent hype cycle report, and I'll just read them off real quick. One, a holistic framework to tackling predictable risks as well as unpredictable events is essential to build a risk management program that combines business continuity management at the operational level with resilience program at the organizational level, right? So that combination of the operational level and the organizational level. Another quote that I love, the purpose of business continuity management, IT resilience, both components of an organizational resilience program, is to increase an organization's capabilities for availability and recovery at all levels after facing a business disruption, right? And that disruption, as we talked about earlier, that can look like downtime, right? Business is absolutely disrupted when the digital portion of your product offering is gone from the internet, right? So we have to do things to prioritize resilience so we can either keep that from happening, or really it's an and/or, keep it from happening and or recover fast when inevitable failures and downtime does occur. And I like to show this, right? The same from the same hype cycle report. It's interesting, right? When you look at this hype cycle for BCMI IT resilience, you see a few things, right, that seem very different. For example, you see, social distancing technologies, data protection. But when you look at this sort of peak of inflated expectations, right around here, and also the innovation trigger, you're looking at chaos engineering, which we'll talk about, right? Very much reliability, resiliency related practice, right? Near the top, site reliability engineering, right? These are all, like, once again, right below that, IT resilience orchestration. These things are clearly reliability, resilience mechanisms, practices, approaches, and technologies, right? That Gartner and other analysts and myself would argue need to be tied to business continuity management going forward. So a quick argument there that business continuity should incorporate IT resilience. And now we get to move on to argument 3. Chaos engineering must be a core component of a modern IT resilience initiative. So we know resilience matters. It's a part of business continuity management, or it should be considered a part of business continuity management. Now, sort of the how do we get there? I'm making the argument that chaos engineering needs to be not the only component, but a core component of this kind of initiative or motion within the business. So we'll go back to the analysts, right? In that same report, we actually have a quote about chaos engineering, which isn't unexpected. It's on the chart, right? In that quote, with chaos engineering, we're able to minimize time to recovery and change failure rate while maximizing uptime and availability. Remember all the sort of horror stories about downtime. We can avoid that. Addressing these elements helps improve the customer experience, customer satisfaction, retention, and acquisition, right? All of that brand bolstering activity, right? CE can be a major component. But now we should talk about why, right? Like, analysts can say things and that's super valuable, and I can make an argument, but let's sort of back it up with the reason. And I think it really starts here, right? We've been doing a lot of testing, right? And I love testing. I mean, I'm from the QA world, right? Clearly, I see value in it. But the reality is, it wasn't built for modern day systems. And what I mean by that is that, it's great for testing at the application layer, right? That application code. And you can see here on the graphic, it covers this small portion of the software stack, right? But in our cloud native microservices based world, there's a whole lot of other stuff sort of underneath the water, right? If you think about that iceberg metaphor, you only see sort of the tippy top of the iceberg, but underneath there's all this crazy stuff. You've got dependencies, you've got config, you've got your infrastructure, and people in process, right? So traditional testing, it just isn't capturing this. Once again, should be being done, but I'd make the argument that chaos engineering is sort of what comes in and is able to sort of make this a more holistic approach to validating the resilience and reliability of your infrastructure and ultimately your software that you're putting out into the world. And as I mentioned here on this last slide, right, you got all this stuff underneath the water. The reality is there are a lot of vulnerabilities in there, right? They're rampant. I'm sure many of you all have seen what people call the microservices Death Star. There's multiple versions out there, right? I have Amazon and Netflix up here. Things get crazy and complicated, right? And here's a diagram of what these microservices deployments and architectures look like for these giant businesses, right? And because of this, like, and the fact it's not static, right? You build it, there are multiple teams working on multiple portions of it, changing it all the time, releasing daily, weekly, sometimes monthly, depending on your release and change frequency, right? But the point is, there's change all the time, new things being added, things being deprecated. And this means that vulnerabilities, they already exist, or they're going to emerge, right? With that rapid speed of change. So we have to figure out, right, how can we best test for these vulnerabilities, remediate for these vulnerabilities, right? And make sure that we can verify that they're no longer there, right? And I'm making the argument that chaos engineering is not only the best way to do it, but it's a safe way to do it. And I mention this because I think that there's some confusion around what chaos engineering is and what it means for the organization, right? And look, it's sort of inherent in the name that this confusion would exist. I think people see chaos engineering as scary. We hear sometimes, right, well, I have enough chaos already, right? And totally backed up. Like you saw the microservices Death Star there. Things are crazy in today's modern world, right, when we're building software. But chaos engineering itself does not mean making things more chaotic, right? It's not this, it doesn't have to be at least this scary, incredibly destructive approach towards validating the resiliency of your software, right? When chaos engineering is done the right way, really what it looks like is a thoughtful, controlled series of experiments, right? Like we like to talk all the time about taking an approach, like the scientific method. You're observing, you're creating hypotheses, you're defining your methodology, right? So you're actually, you're looking at your testable surfaces, and then you're defining, okay, these are the things we need to test. These are the things that are most business critical, and potentially might leave us the most vulnerable if we haven't validated their resilience or their reliability, right? And then you start with a small blast radius, right? And you can have technology in place that allows you to revert back, right? You can halt that experiment if you're seeing weird things occur, right? So there are some really, really safe and controlled and what I'd say really intelligent ways to use chaos engineering as a primary core component of your resilience initiative. And the reality is it checks the boxes, right? The things that we've talked about already, like what does it take to maximize uptime, reduce downtime, build a great user experience. With chaos engineering, you're able to do a few really cool things, right? One, you can assess your systems, right? See which services exist, where dependencies exist, what are at risk. You can progressively test these systems, right? To actually isolate the issues, like once again, find where there might be risk or vulnerability. And you can send those findings off to your dev and architecture teams, right? To fix and optimize vulnerabilities, right? Like we'd like to talk about this word of improvement and optimizing, because it's not always that you're fixing something that's necessarily broken. It's just that there are areas where you can make your software more resilient, right? And it starts with finding those levels of vulnerability and risk that might sort of be hidden in this chaotic infrastructure. Once again, also beyond just optimizing the system itself to prevent things like downtime, you can pass these findings off to your SRE and ops teams, right? To actually update runbooks for faster, more efficient recovery. That's something that we see a ton, right? Like we've seen mean time to detection and mean time to resolution, like being reduced by like 75% after like one single large scale experiment, right? It's really some interesting stuff. So I just have this one slide to sort of explain it, talk about it as safe. But of course, if you have any questions, leave them in the Q&A or reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk about some CE. And then also, I wouldn't talk about it if we didn't have proven value and results, right? The reality, like it's a chaos engineering there's a trend behind it. There's some buzz. There's a trend and buzz behind a lot of things, right? I mean, I'm sure that you all experience tons of people telling you, hey, come use our tool or come do this thing. And it's gonna make your life better. But the reality is like there aren't that many trends, right, that actually have proven value and results behind them that I think a lot of people can point to. And look, research, it backs up this practice and it has innovators investing in this practice now, right? And we go back to this slide, it should look a little familiar, right? The generating revenue, saving time, reducing risk, and bolstering your brand. We actually ran a state of chaos engineering report not too long ago. And what we found was that on the revenue side of the house, the teams who frequently ran chaos engineering experiments, they have greater than 99.9% uptime, right? They're at that 3 nines or above, many of them at 4, and some with you. If you want to get to 5, we've seen some 5, right? Saving time, we saw reductions in mean time to detection from hours to 5 minutes, right? And 23% of the team surveyed had a mean time to resolution of under 1 hour and 60% under 12, right? So some serious improvements. And I mentioned earlier, we actually have some customers who have reduced that MTTR by 75%. So it's pretty cool. And this reduction in risk, right? So teams who implemented CE, they're actually able to reduce their high severity incidents by 10x. So that's pretty incredible, right? I mean, of course, it depends on, what does 10x mean, but right, I mean, finding one, if you're going from 10 to 1, that's a big deal, right? And that moves right into the next bucket of value of bolstering your brand. So we saw that the teams running these large scale experiments that we often refer to as game days have actually reported finding and fixing upwards of 35 bugs in a single experiment, right? So each of these bugs has the potential to decimate brand reputation, right? And I think we're all cognizant of that. And it's cool that, chaos engineering gives you the opportunity in one experiment that takes a handful of hours, and you can find 35 bugs, right? That's really something else. And it really is something that can have positive consequence for your brand. Here's just a few quotes, right, that we've collected around CE that I like to point to, right? Doing chaos engineering has helped us break down knowledge monopolies and validate our runbooks, resulting in dramatic improvements in incident response times and production environments from Target. And one from Workiva, right? It changes the exercise from one of guessing to one of staging and of observing, right? So it's sort of we don't understand our systems to we understand it. We can tame that complexity, right? We can mitigate the risk. From emergent failure paths, we literally have no other way to discover, right? So it's like, this is the only way they can do it, right? To really bolster that reliability and resilience. So I wanted to sort of leave us with, I've talked a lot about all these 3 arguments, right? And this third one with chaos engineering, why I think it's so valuable. But I always like to sort of end with something practical, right? So what should we do to make this happen, right? So I've just given a short checklist, and this might look different from organization to organization, right? And also it might not all happen in the same order based on maturity. But the important thing is that we're taking a methodical approach to people, process, culture, and technology. I'm a product guy. I love the tech, but the reality is, like, you can't just buy a tool and have it solve all your problems, right? Like filling out a procurement document doesn't change anything, right? The people, process, culture also really matters a whole lot here. But the checklist that I've listed off that hopefully you all can take with you today, the first one, list your technical and business initiatives and objectives that you want to achieve with something like chaos engineering or something like an IT resilience program, right? We need to go into this shift and this motion with an idea of what the goals are. And attached to that, right, determining your KPIs and metrics that you'll need to be able to track towards your goal. And this is where I think it's useful to start looking for the technology and customer success services that work best for your team, right? I'm a huge fan of finding expertise in the market to help with this kind of motion and this kind of practice. And then you're starting to prioritize the targets you want to test, right? Creating recovery plans in case of failure, and then informing your organization about all these experiments, right? There's a really cool thing with chaos engineering with some of these large scale experiments where you can bring a ton of people from the organization into, well, maybe not one room now, maybe one virtual room. But they're all sort of, working together in these large scale game days or experiments, the things that, you can find all these bugs during. And it brings together all these cross-functional teams all these cross-functional teams and roles in the organization to make the software that you're building and selling more resilient and more reliable. And the question naturally arises, I mentioned technology earlier, right? Which chaos engineering tool, technology, or solution is the best? Now I mentioned I love product, right? And many times I've pitched the benefits of the product that I love the most. But the reality is, like, I'm not here to try and pitch a silver bullet solution to anybody, right? I think that I actually have a coworker of mine who likes to talk about you can't buy DevOps, right? And her point is, You can't just buy a tool and it fix all the issues, right? It's much more than that. And I really believe it, right? And I think that technology is an important factor and it's something to be taken very seriously. And I do think it's worth investing in, but it should be invested in because it makes that people, process, and culture shift towards resilience easier, faster, more efficient, or like talk about more fun, right? So I'll reiterate that. When you're looking for a technology, looking for a tool, looking for a vendor, think about that. Not just the flashiest, like find the thing that makes that shift to resilience, makes chaos engineering easier and better for your organization. And just to hit on the more fun piece, because this isn't mentioned a ton. The reality is like recovering from downtime and disasters for a lot of people within the organization is not fun, right? Getting paged at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., it's not enjoyable, right? This is what I think it's cool about some of these technologies out there that they can eliminate that, right? This can be a, prepare at 3 p.m. on a Friday so you're not up at 3 a.m. on a Saturday kind of thing, right? And also, as I mentioned earlier, these large scale experiments, something that I've seen a lot with our customers, they have a blast. Like it's awesome getting your testing teams, your performance engineering teams, your ops teams, your SRE in a room, your DRP teams in a room and running experiments, right? Seeing how the system stands up to levels of stress and coming up with plans together on how to best optimize, fix, or prepare for recovering for similar issues, right? So there's this fun component that I think can really boost employee morale, which I think is something that it's really important right now and really important all the time. And this is something I think chaos engineering can really help deliver on. So with that, that's the majority of my presentation, right? I want to wrap it up real quick and then open up the next remaining part of this hour for some questions. But just the wrap up summary slide, the original arguments and the evidence, right? And we'll sort of go line by line here. The first being that the business should care about resilience. The evidence, outages, downtime, other resilience issues have serious implications, as we've discussed, on revenue, spend, customer experience, brand reputation, right? So it is something that has to matter to what people call the business side of the house, right? And the second being that IT resilience should be a core pillar of business continuity. Gartner points to it. I think there's a real reason to believe that when you're in the digital environment we are, right, you got to be able to keep digital business processes and digital business offerings able to be continuous regardless of certain kinds of disruptions, right? And the third is that CE, chaos engineering, needs to be a core component of a modern resilience initiative, right? We saw that this traditional testing, it's still good. We have to keep doing it. I believe that wholeheartedly, but we have to supplement it, right? We have to be able to find those other vulnerabilities sort of hiding underneath the water, right? The remaining 90% of the iceberg. And the reality is that the value of chaos engineering in doing this has been proven, right? We saw that it improves uptime, it reduces the risk of high severity issues and drastically reduces the time actually spent resolving those issues. So with that, I thank you all for listening to me. I know it was a lot of information today. And once again, I recognize that time is precious. So I really appreciate it. It was a blast for me to be able to talk about this. And I'd like to go ahead and answer any questions that you all have.
Excellent. Yes, we do have questions here, but just as a reminder that if you do have a question, you can go over to your Q&A tab and submit any questions you might have. First question, which tools are more supportive and secure between open source versus commercial tools?
Well, I mean, this is, there's a lot of nuance here. I mean, I'm by no means an anti-open source individual, right? But most of them aren't going to come with security baked in, right? You're going to have to work on that. Depending on the vendor, I can't speak for every vendor out there and their security posture. I do know that, one of the things that a vendor typically pitches is that we manage and we bake in security from the start. So, security is something that I see a lot of people in the market caring a lot about, and the teams that typically really care about maintaining a strict security posture. I typically it's usually a between vendors conversation, right? Because I think that vendors do sort of promise and offer a higher level of security and security standards.
Okay, and the next question, are there generic cost of downtime formulas that you've seen work more effectively than others?
Yeah, this is something it is difficult to quantify from time to time. We have we have an ROI calculator on our website that you can actually use if you're curious about this. But yeah, I can't remember the exact equation right now, but I do know that a lot of it does. We shouldn't look at the cost of downtime as consistent across every business, right? Like it's very dependent on revenue. It's very dependent. It's seasonal, right? So like cost of downtime, as I mentioned earlier, Black Friday, probably higher than some other non-shopping holiday, right, during the year. So yeah, I think we need to be careful trying to calculate that so that we're honest about that number. But there are resources out there to help you do it. And I would be happy to talk through that if you want to talk offline, reach out to me on LinkedIn or something, and I can hopefully point you towards some of those resources.
Excellent. Next question. How can we be sure that chaos engineering won't bring our critical systems offline and cause the exact same problem that it claims to fix?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is why, I really prioritize referring to chaos engineering as not only that I think one of the best ways to do this resilience thing, but also one of the safest, right? It's not guaranteed that it won't break stuff. And I think this is why taking a methodical approach to something like people, process, and culture has to matter, right? If you just go get a tool and say, hey, teams, go inject failure, that's dangerous, right? Like you don't want to do that. You need to make sure that you are educated on the practice. This is why I recommend working with, I think customer success is a huge portion of this journey, because you need to partner with experts that allow you, that work with you to sort of empower you to do this in a mature and intelligent and safe way. And also technology does matter, right? Like chaos engineering as a practice sort of started as this random or pseudo-random injection of fault into your systems. It's evolved from that, right? Like we have some really great vendors out there that have controls and halt mechanisms and recovery mechanisms sort of baked in. So there are really good, safe, controlled, thoughtful ways to do this. But once again, this is why you can't just go purchase a tool, right? There's a whole lot of variables that have to be taken into account.
All right. Next question. Should chaos engineering and reliability testing be approached manually, or is there a way we can automate this?
The answer is yes, right? I think that it depends on the org. We have some organizations, for example, we have some customers who have come to us and they're ready to automate from the get-go. And that's awesome. I mean, you think about what this would look like integrated into your CI/CD pipeline. It's like a bunch of reliability checkpoints, right? That are, you're constantly running these tests to ensure that your systems are continuously reliable. And that's great. I think that should be an end goal of a lot of teams that are doing this. But there's still a lot of room for manual work. And we see a lot of people who sort of start with the manual approach. I mentioned game days earlier. We have a bunch of people come in together, kind of like a pizza party. And they run all this large scale experiment, right? They get comfortable with what chaos engineering is doing. They see the impacts on their system, see the benefits of running it. And then they can sort of choose from that you go like a list of test cases, right? Or experiments that you've run, and choose which ones you want to use for integration testing, or use for regression testing, right? Like you can sort of automate these tests after you've run them manually once and introduce that to something like a regression suite. So I think that, I love the approach of let's start manual, get comfortable, and move to automating that, very similar to testing in the QA world. But also if you're a technology mature team and an automation mature team and you come to a chaos engineering solution with a CI/CD pipeline intact or something, get automating. If you're comfortable with that, then I think it's awesome. I mean, it's definitely going to result in high levels of availability and uptime. That's for sure.
Nice. Okay. Next question. Most of the chaos engineering tools are open source, like Chaos Monkey. What are the major differences between open source and commercial solution?
Yeah, I mean, there's a long list, right? Once again, a lot of teams that are adopting open source solutions are then taking it and building on top of it, right? Pretty much all of them are doing that. So you can kind of make a lot of that what you want, but there are limitations, and clearly I'm biased, right? I work in product for a commercial vendor, but I think there are some real reasons to look at that, right? As I mentioned earlier, that the customer success portion is a big thing, and the support is a big thing. Also, cost. I think like the math that we've done, like it can cost upwards of like 75 times as much over time to build your own on top of open source and then maintain it, right? Because think about all these hidden costs of free stuff. Like none of this stuff is free. It's open source, right? You've got to put the employees to, you got to put teams on building it, maintaining it. And that takes a long time and a lot of money. You think about what happens if those employees leave. Now you got to onboard someone else or another team to take control of it. But then also, like I said, the customer success piece, like I think expertise really matters here. And being able to partner with an organization that has that expertise behind them to help you on your resilience, reliability, and chaos engineering journey, I think is really crucial. And also, like, you're not responsible for keeping the product cool, right? Like vendors have a financial obligation and incentive to make what they offer really good, really secure, easy to scale, and easy to adopt, right? And I think that's always an advantage, really, in any field between something like open source and a vendor or a commercial product.
Okay, and the last question we have so far, do you see chaos engineering and resilience as something that is worth investing in before or after migration to cloud and or microservices?
Once again, the answer is yes here. It doesn't have to be necessarily after. I mean, I understand why that would be a question, right? Because we show the microservices Death Star. We talk about chaos engineering a lot in the context of cloud and cloud native, but we've actually had a ton of customers that adopt us during a cloud migration, right? Because when you're migrating to microservices, like you can actually test the resilience and reliability of what you're building as you're building it, so that you don't get there and stuff's all broken, right? You ensure reliability. Essentially you can build reliability and resilience into your system from the ground up, right? As you're building it. So I think it's definitely a best practice that we'd recommend. That being said, if you're already in cloud, already in microservices, I think chaos engineering is it's a really important next step, right? So I think that sort of both use cases, there's serious value for CE there.
Excellent. Okay, we still have plenty of time for questions if anyone would like to submit anything. But for now, just as a reminder that today's webinar has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the webinar, you will be able to watch it again. We'll be sending an email with a link to access the webinar on demand. The webinar will also be available on devops.com. Just look in the on-demand section of the webinar page, and it should be there. Okay, another question here. What factors compel the needs for chaos, ENGG, and testing on any system?
So can you repeat that question again really quickly?
Yes. What factors compel the needs for chaos engineering and testing on any system?
What factors compel the need? I think I want to answer this question, but I want to make sure I understand the nuance of it. I mean, I think I understand this as sort of like, what are the signals, right? That if we see, we should start this kind of practice. I mean, the reality is, like, I think that if you have a digital business, right, and you have a digital portion of your business that's generating revenue, like that is a signal, right? Like, but then again, like there are things that I think make organizations more ready for this practice. For example, like, having monitoring observability around is going to be a crucial component, right? So you actually see the impact of chaos engineering on your system. I think that if your teams have experienced something like downtime, like ask your SREs if you have SREs, right? And ask your ops teams and disaster recovery, like, are they getting paged a bunch, right? Like, is this a problem for them? Have they seen outages? Has your business suffered from the result of downtime or really poor performance that's due to resilience and reliability issues? And if so, like, it's definitely worthwhile to explore chaos engineering as an option. I hope I answered your question. And if not, you can shoot us another question. We'll make sure that we'll have someone follow up with you.
Definitely. Okay, so still have plenty of time, but in the meantime, I will announce our 4 Amazon gift card winners for today. Our first winner is Vincent A. Congratulations, Vincent. Our second winner is Chris H. Our third winner is Colin M. And our final winner is Kevin C. So congratulations to all our winners. We'll be reaching out to you via email with instructions for claiming your Amazon gift card. So please check your inbox. And if you don't see it there, check your spam folder. Okay, so we'll do a last call for questions here. Okay. Okay, going once, twice. Okay, well, Alex, thank you very much for taking the time to put this presentation together. It's very informative. I hope our attendees learned as much as I did, especially in regards to chaos testing. But thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, Julio, and thank you all again for joining. And I'd love to hear your feedback. So reach out on LinkedIn or something like that. I mean, there's not many Alex Drags out there, so if you search for it, you should be able to find me. But yeah, any questions, any feedback, I'd love to hear it. And I hope you all have a great rest of the day.
Excellent. Well, thanks again. And thank you to the audience for your time and engagement. This is Julio Godinez signing off. Until next time, be well.
Bye, everybody.